Welcome to part 1 of the entire plot of Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. I will not be doing any spoilers except for everything that happens up till this book. I also plan to do the entire Throne of Glass series. Definitely stick around and subscribe if you want to see breakdowns of every single one of these books. And by all means, let's get started with chapter 1. Celaena is on one of her assassin jobs for the king. She's already broken into someone's house late in the night and she sneaks up to his bed and she's ready to make the kill. And in this situation, Celaena was ordered to kill Lord Chaol and his wife for unknown reasons. So they're sleeping in their bed and she sneaks up with her sword and she's basically ready to him in his sleep. And that's all. Chapter 2. Flash forward to Celaena presenting the head of Lord Chaol to the king. They're in the throne room. Chaol and Dorian are actually there as well. And in pure assassin fashion, she just kind of throws this bag with a head in it at the feet of the king. He's upset because the head is unrecognizable. You cannot tell who this man is. And Celaena's like, well, if you wanted a clean job, you should have asked for a clean job. And then she informs him that the rest of the remains are at the bottom of the ocean. The king informs her that her money is up in her rooms ready to go, but he has her next name. But it's not just a singular name. The king is now aware of a rebel movement going on in his kingdom. He already has a whole list of names, but for some reason that we don't really understand, he's giving Celaena just one name at a time, and then as soon as she makes the kill, she gets the next name on the list. So the king hands her the first sheet of paper with the first name on it. And the name is Archer Finn. Now, we don't know who this is yet, but Celaena reveals to us that she knows Archer Finn. He was at the Assassin's Keep. He wasn't trained to be an assassin like her, but he did learn self-defense at the Assassin's Keep. So they do know each other from there. And then basically tells her, oh, by the way, you have 1 month to this man or I'm sending you back to the prison camp Endovir. Let's jump to Dorian's POV because he's also in this throne room. Dorian is disturbed by Celaena because if you think about it, in the first book, he didn't really see her in her assassin element. He saw her basically playing in a tournament where she showed aggression for sure, but she wasn't murdering people. And as disturbed as he also is attracted to it a little bit. It's a little disturbing, but he calls her a beautiful wraith. If you remember, she ended book 1 by telling Dorian hey, this is never gonna happen. This is the first time he's really entertaining the thought, what if she just played him and manipulated him to win the tournament? And then he decides that he's gonna confront her about that. Let's see how that goes. Now let's jump back to Celaena's POV because it's later in the day and she's with Chaol and he calls her out. Apparently the brutality that she showed in the throne room is not who she is, and Chaol and her work very closely together now, so he has a pretty good idea of who she is as a person. He's also the only one who knows that the killings the king's putting her on is really taking a toll on her. She puts a face on for everyone else, but she lets herself be herself with Chaol. As always, because it's his job, Chaol wants a debrief and Celaena's just absolutely not, I'm not feeling up to it. But Chaol tells her that he literally is worried sick every single time she leaves. Not because he doesn't think that she's capable, but because he's actually really worried about her and he's grown to care about her as a person. Let's jump forward a couple hours. Celaena gives in, she debriefs Chaol. Philippa cleans her off after she's been slumming it for the past couple weeks. And now she's alone in her rooms and she's surprised how easy it's been to lie to Chaol and the king. I'm sorry, what? Celaena has not been killing anyone. None of the names that the king has given her up to this point has she actually killed. Every single time she's given a name, she hunts the person down and then gives them an option. Either die right then and there, or take on a whole new identity and disappear forever. So far, every single person has chosen to take on a new identity and disappear. She basically goes to hospitals and infirmaries where there's dead people and takes their bodies and then recreates crime scenes that reflect the debrief that she gives Chaol and the king. Here's the problem now. Archer Finn, not only does she know him, but he's extremely well known in social circles. He is so popular and she's wondering how in the world she's gonna make him disappear. Chapter 3, Celaena tells us that she's been having actually a lot of nightmares about the Ritterak and Cain. Something else that's really spooked her about Cain that she really can't figure out is why he knew so much about her past. past, like before Terrasen was demolished and before she was found in a river almost frozen to death. He knew so much about her previous life, and she's never told anyone any of that stuff. So she's still trying to figure out why he knows half the stuff he knew. So Celaena and Nehemia are hanging out as best friends do, and Celaena decides to tell Nehemia about this rebel movement that the king is so worried about. Nehemia is really tense about this and asks a crazy ton of questions, all of which Celaena can't answer. All she knows is that there is one. She doesn't even know what this rebel movement is or what it's founded upon. She just knows that one exists. Weird topic change, but do you guys remember Endovir, the slave camp that Celaena was at the beginning of book 1? So apparently there's another slave camp. I want to make sure that I'm saying this correctly. So there's another prison camp called Calcula. This one is significantly more brutal than even Endovir was. This is the most brutal slave camp that you could ever be sent to, and it is full of Eoway people, aka Princess Nehemia's people. The King of Adarlan is like really pushing that this place be even more brutal and that it be expanded and that they fill it with even more Eoway people. So obviously Nehemia's upset, she's angry, she's hurt, she's frustrated. Celaena just clams up. Like, they talk about everything, but for some reason, every single time this comes up, maybe it's Celaena still dealing with her trauma of being stuck at a slave camp for a year, but she just will not entertain any sort of conversation with Nehemia about this slave camp. Chapter 4, Chaol and Celaena are going on a run together, as they always do, and we're actually going to experience this chapter through Chaol's eyes. He's dealing with the trauma of having killed Cain. Chaol opens up to Celaena about it because obviously she would understand it better than anyone, and she does share the story of her first kill and also how hard it is for her, and she basically says that she carries every killing in her heart, like everywhere she goes, and it's never been easy for her. And then she reminds Chaol something really important. He didn't just kill Cain just to kill Cain. He saved Celaena's life. If he did not kill Cain, Celaena would be dead. So they finish their run, they're heading back to the castle, and apparently sometime between book 1 and book 2, Chaol has become a hunk and is attracting all the attention of the ladies of the court. Do I sense jealousy from Celaena? Yes, I do. So Celaena and Chaol start talking about her upcoming assignment, which is Archer Finn, and basically Celaena lets Chaol know that yes, she knows him, but she still needs to track him because she hasn't seen him or heard from him in over a year or more. Honestly, I don't think they say how long it's been since they've seen each other, but it's been a long time. So she needs to go scout it out. And Chaol offers to help her on the assignment. As she's basically telling Chaol, over my dead body, they run into Dorian. But Dorian is not alone. Dorian is with Roland Havillard, Dorian's cousin. We don't like Roland. I'm just letting you know off the bat, we don't like him. We never do like him. Okay, good talk. And he reveals that not only is he now in Adarlan, but he's also been invited to be a part of the King's Council. And he's going to be around. And then not only does Dorian hate Roland, but we find out that Chaol hates Roland so much that they actually got in a brawl in the past 4, and Chaol knocked Roland out. And more on that later. So we're gonna actually jump to Dorian's point of view because it is killing him to see Celaena and Chaol together. Like, absolutely killing him. It's kind of sad, but at the same time, it wasn't ever gonna happen. As much as I love it in book 1, it makes sense for the rest of the series that they're just not a thing, and that's okay. That's fine. So we're actually gonna go back to Celaena's point of view, but in her rooms later that day, because Dorian decides that he's finally gonna have that confrontation with her that she used him to win the tournament. Instead, he kind of chickens out because he realizes like he doesn't want to stir the pot or make things any worse, so he just tells her like, hey, I want to be friends. Like, I know us being a thing didn't really work out, but I still like you as a person. I'd like to be friends. They agree that they should be friends, but at the same time, Celaena doesn't want to get too close to him because she knows inevitably they're just both gonna get hurt in the end. Chapter 5, Celaena is spying on Archer from the rooftops. And it's kind of sad because now that she's not confined to the castle and she can actually adventure around the kingdom to do her jobs, she's starting to have a lot of flashbacks of her time in Rifthold as an assassin in the Assassin's Keep. And it wasn't exactly a happy life or an exciting life, so this isn't like a sweet nostalgic flashbacks, it's like straight up traumatic flashbacks. So I guess she figures out everything she needs to know, so she heads back to the castle and she has dinner with Dorian in his rooms. And we also find out that this has become like routine for them, like they just hang out all the time. It's really sweet. Like, she's just eating her dinner and reading a book, and he's working and doing paperwork and whatever else he does, I guess. Now, there's actually a really big conversation that happens here, and honestly, if you read Assassin's Blade first, then that's fine. I'm not going to judge you, although I definitely give very strong opinions about how I think you should read the series in this video. But they do have a conversation about something that does happen in Assassin's Blade. In my opinion, I think we just need to skip this conversation for now. But he starts to see her more and more as a human being. Also, this is where he gets to learn about Sam and that she loved someone who was murdered. Yeah, and I think that just gives him a lot of perspective on why she feels so strongly about the things that she does. Anyways, I'm just not going to dive deep into the details because we're going to really go in depth on all that stuff when we do Assassin's Blade, which I might do after Heir of Fire or after Crown of Midnight. I haven't decided yet, so if you have an opinion on when you want me to do Assassin's Blade, please drop that below in the comments because that will really help me know which book to do next. I guess as like a return for Celaena getting so vulnerable about her past, Chaol decides to share something about his past. And we don't get this often, okay? We really don't get a lot from Chaol. He shares why he hates Roland so much. Chaol had a girlfriend, for lack of better words, and he loved her, or at least he thought he loved her. Roland, for the sake of putting Chaol in his place, basically seduced his girl, got her to cheat on Chaol. And when Chaol found out about it, obviously he was super heartbroken and upset, but then he Roland and knocked him out. So was he able to get even? No. But did the vengeance feel a little good? I'm sure it did. So after a couple heart-to-hearts, Chaol starts to walk Celaena back to her room. And basically they just decide that they feel closer to each other after opening up to each other a little bit more. And they're just all happy, warm, cuddly, fuzzy feelings about their friendship. But after Chaol drops Celaena off in her room, she cannot go to sleep. She's very stir-crazy, so she decides just to make a quick trip down to the library and get a book. Because what else do you do when you can't sleep? You read a book. But as she's on her way down to the library, she sees a cloaked figure. His hood is up so high that she cannot see this person's face at all. And then it like turns towards her and starts walking in her direction. This gets so weird. The Eye of Elena, her amulet that the ghost of Queen Elena gave her, starts to glow. And then the cloaked figure starts hissing like a literal feral animal. It runs away in a very animalistic manner. So Celaena decides, you know what? I don't need a book anymore tonight. And then she hightails it to her rooms as well. And honestly, I don't blame her. If I were her, I'd be running back to my rooms like my life depends on it. Because it kind of does. Chapter 6. Celaena gets back to her rooms and she realizes that she needs answers from the Queen of Elena, like, right now. So she goes down to the tombs. But when she gets down to the tombs, she hears a voice go, "Aren't you gonna knock?" The skull door knocker on the door is talking to her. This did not happen in book 1. This is strictly a book 2 thing. But honestly, this door knocker, he is the sassiest character of all the characters in this book series. And he reveals that his name is Mort. And he is a magical door knocker, but he didn't talk to her in the first book because he didn't think she could handle magic yet. But now that she's obviously seen a lot of stuff, he figured, might as well throw a talking doorknob at her. So this door knocker, Mort, decides to tell Celaena that the Queen Elena is actually not in the tombs right now. Because apparently when she siphoned all the poison from Celaena and banished the army of the dead, it burnt her out. So she needs to like stay away for a little bit, I guess, to like regain her ghostly energy. I'm not gonna pretend like I understand how that works, but she needs a break. She needs some time off. I'm just gonna read this next part because my words are not gonna do it justice. And it's way too important for me to botch this for y'all. "It's not over yet, is it?" Celaena asked Mort at last. "No," Mort said, quieter than he'd been before. This is what Celaena had been dreading for weeks, for months. "Let's hear the message," Celaena said, sighing. Mort cleared his throat and in a voice that sounded eerily like the Queen's. "If I could leave you in peace, I would. But you have lived your life aware that you will never escape certain burdens. Whether you like it or not, you are bound to a fate of this world. As the King's champion, you are now in a position of power, and you can make a difference in the lives of many. Cain and the Ritterak were just the beginning of the threat to Aurelia. There is a far deadlier power poised to devour the world. And I have to find it, I suppose? Yes, there will be clues to lead you, signs you must follow. Refusing to kill the King's targets is the first and smallest step. You may have many questions at this point. I know I did. But as always, you're not going to get answers for a while. You just gotta hold tight, keep your curiosity. So Celaena then tells more about the freaky creature in the library who was all animalistic and hissy and weird. Mort all but confirms that this is all definitely connected to the King of Adarlan. You must discover where the king's power comes from and what he plans to do before it's too late. Celaena snorted. Don't you understand? It's already too late. It's been too late for years now. Where was Celaena 10 years ago when there was a whole host of heroes that she could have her pick of? Where was she in her ridiculous quest when the world truly needed them? When Terrasen's heroes were cut down or hunted and executed by Adarlan's armies? Where was she when the kingdoms fell one by one to this king? The world is already in ruin and I won't go on some fool's errand. Mort just glowered at her. You're that selfish, that cowardly. Why did you come here tonight, Celaena? To help us all, or just to help yourself? Elena told me about you, about your past. And then Celaena just storms back to her rooms because she just decides, you know what? I don't have to answer to a sassy door knocker. And I understand that's a lot of information, and you probably feel like you're missing something, and you are. And you're not gonna get it for a while, so just hang tight. Chapter 7. Celaena's basically fighting this inner war now because she knows something's happening and she wants to help stop it, but she doesn't want to be the one responsible for needing to stop it. She also knows that she needs to figure out this whole Archer Finn situation, so she decides she's going to run into Archer on accident, and she decides to bring Chaol along for this part because he's been practically begging for her to take him on a mission. And because she's been tracking him, or basically the assassin way of saying stalking him, she knows that he's going to be at tea, so she takes Chaol and they're gonna go wait for a reservation at the tea place that they know Archer Finn goes to. So she and Chaol pretend like they're waiting for a table, and then surprise, surprise, she just happens to run into Archer Finn. And here's the thing, Archer is very excited to see Celaena. He might be a little too excited to see Celaena. This is also where we learn that he has a pet name for her, and he calls her Lena. As you probably expected, Chaol, who's supposed to be playing the part of the silent chaperone, is absolutely boiling inside. So they decide to catch up for a minute, and there's flirting. Archer is a shameless flirt. He might be worse of a flirt than Dorian or Roland even, which is saying a lot. While catching up, he asks her how Endovir was, because the last thing he heard about with her was that she was caught and sent to the prison camp. She tells him about her year there, she tells him about the competition and how she won it, and now she's the king's assassin. Archer apologizes for what happened to Sam, because he did hear about that scenario as well, and then asks if Celaena knows if Arobynn knows she's back or not. Neither of them really know, but honestly, considering how well connected he is, he probably does know. Unfortunately, that's just kind of unavoidable. And then Archer asks her on a date of sorts. He says like, hey, let's get dinner and catch up. And she says yes. So we're gonna jump back to Chaol's point of view because he is fighting a temper right now when he's talking to Celaena. But what's funny is that out of all of that, he is by far the most upset about the fact he calls her Lena, but he is very pleased when Celaena shares with him that she actually hates that nickname. It helps him feel a little bit better about the situation. Chapter 8, Celaena's given a side quest to be a guard at a fancy royal dinner that's gonna have a lot of nobility and festivities. So Celaena's just observing from the back, and she sees Roland sitting with Dorian, and she basically picks up a lot of really sketchy things about him. We don't know what exactly, but she just knows like this kid is trouble and he's going to drag Dorian down with him. So she decides she needs to warn Dorian. But then we jump to Dorian's point of view, and he keeps catching Celaena looking in his direction, but it's not like looking at him like she's interested in him. She's studying him, and he doesn't know how he feels about that. But he notices whenever she's not looking at him, she's looking at Chaol. And when she's looking at Chaol, she has a look of endearment, and that is absolutely killing Dorian inside. And then he also kind of has this moment where he's like, how blind was I? Like, how long have they clearly had feelings for each other and I just couldn't see it because I was blinded by my infatuation with Celaena. So out of anger, he starts to storm out of the dining room. He's like, you know what, I'm done, I'm going back to my royal chambers. And on his way out, Celaena chases him and she's like, hey, I need to talk to you. I think Roland's a bad influence and he's gonna tear you down. And he's like, I think that you just manipulated me and my feelings and used me to win the tournament. And she's like, seriously, dude? Like, you're playing this with me right now? What's going on? So much for being friends, you know? Obviously, that's kind of a dumpster fire. Dorian leaves, and then Celaena, instead of going back to her rooms, decides that she's gonna go down to the dungeon prison cells and she's gonna visit Kaltain Rompier. Kaltain has been rotting down in the prison for 2 months now. Chapter 9. Celaena has a lot of questions for Kaltain, specifically involving Roland. Kaltain only really shares that he can't be trusted and refuses to give more information, but when Celaena goes to push, she realizes that Kaltain's really jumpy, and Kaltain says that apparently the Night Guard has been turning their back and letting Parrington make visits to her at night, and she has bruises all over her wrists and she's covered in injuries, and Parrington's basically been coming in almost every single night and just abusing her, and the night shift has basically turned their backs and pretended like they didn't know anything. So Celaena sympathizes with Kaltain in this moment because although Kaltain isn't necessarily a good person, she doesn't deserve this. So she decides that she's just gonna let Kaltain be and she's not gonna, you know, threaten her anymore to give her more information. And then she also decides that she is going to tell Chaol about the Night Guard because it needs to be put to an end. And then on her way out, she decides to leave her cloak with Kaltain because it's absolutely freezing down there and she thought the least she could do is give her something to warm her. And then Kaltain makes a very interesting comment. She says, "I don't believe I was ever brought here to marry Parrington. They have always wanted me here for another reason." That is very interesting, don't you think? Sarah J. Maas doesn't put stuff like that in books just for funsies. Like that means something. Celaena, first thing she does is she goes to Chaol and she tells him about the Night Guard. Second thing she does is she goes to Nehemia and tells her everything. And then while she's talking with Nehemia, Chaol comes back a moment later with absolutely bloodied knuckles and says the Night Guard is no longer going to be a problem and we're just going to trust him on that one. All of this talk kind of gets them back to the corruption of the king and Duke Parrington because clearly Kaltain was used and manipulated. Nehemia starts reminiscing about a time where honor ruled in Adarlan, but it was no match for Terrasen. Now, Terrasen is where Celaena's from, but apparently it was like the kingdom of the time. Like, it had the most power of all the kingdoms. They basically just set the example of a kingdom ruled by just and kind and good people. This is also where we learn that Terrasen was the first conquered kingdom in Adarlan's quest for dominating all of Irelia, because apparently if Terrasen had known what Adarlan was up to, they would have prepared an army that Adarlan could not have competed with. And also on top of that, everyone would have come up behind Terrasen because it was literally like the kingdom to beat. So Adarlan went at them hard and fast in a super unexpected, sneaky way. And then Nehemia poses an interesting question. Do you think another court like that could ever rise again? Not just in Terrasen, but anywhere. I've heard the court in Wendelin, a new kingdom that we haven't talked about yet, but we will revisit, still follows the old ways, but they're across the ocean and do us no good. They looked in the other direction while the king enslaved our lands, and they still refuse all calls for aid. Then Celaena basically says, this is too heavy of a conversation for breakfast. And then just asks Nehemia, so what's new in your life? So this is another scenario where Celaena just kind of shuts down Nehemia, and even though they're friends who talk about everything, like Celaena's just not wanting to talk about a lot of stuff, specifically revolving politics. But Nehemia actually does answer her question about what's new. Apparently, Roland's new position that he's been assigned to in court is to basically micromanage Nehemia. Chapter 10, we are in Dorian and Chaol's POV, and they're walking around together talking about how Holland is back. If you remember, Holland is Dorian's baby brother who's like a little demon child and everyone hates, but he's actually coming back to the kingdom. He's been away at like some school, I guess, but he's coming back to the kingdom because with this rebel movement that's apparently starting up, they think it's safest for him to be back in Adarlan under the king and the king's guards watch. But Holland's birthday's also coming up, so they're gonna throw this huge carnival themed party. Yay! And there's also gonna be this really big fancy dinner tonight to like celebrate his return. But Chaol reveals that Celaena's not going to be there because she's having dinner with Archer Finn. Dorian's a little confused on why she's going on a date with someone she's supposed to be killing, which rightfully so. That is a little confusing. Chaol does kind of share that Celaena does know him personally, and she's going to try to see if she can coax some more information out of him about what this so-called rebel movement is and who else is a part of it. Celaena's POV getting ready for her fancy dinner. Chaol is stressing because let's just say Celaena is looking fine. A little too fine for Chaol's liking considering she's going on a date with another dude. But yeah, Celaena heads off on her date with Archer Finn and there's nothing Chaol can do. So flash forward, we're officially on the date. And there's a lot of shameless flirting and Archer Finn asking more questions about basically what all she's been up to since they last saw each other a couple of years ago. He really just wants to know how she ended up serving the king. Like that seems to be something he's hyper fixating on. Then after their dinner, they hop into his carriage and he decides that he's gonna drop her off at the castle. As they're on their way back to the castle, he kisses her. Sir. But Celaena stops him because, fun fact, Archer Finn was an orphan. As an orphan, he was discovered to be very beautiful by a woman named Clarice. And Clarice took him in and basically forced him into the life of a courtesan. That's why he's widely known and why he has a very flirtatious demeanor. Celaena, knowing this, stops him and she's like, do you really want to live this way? Like, is this really what you want out of life? Archer Finn reveals, no, this is not what I want for my life. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I only do this because I was basically stolen off the streets as a kid and forced to live this life. And so she just looks him dead in the eyes and says, the king sent me to kill you. Chapter 11. In 0.5 seconds, this guy is on the opposite end of the carriage, armed with a dagger. He is not ready to go down, but he is ready to go down swinging. Celaena shares that the king thinks that he's a part of this rebel movement, and she gives him the same offer she gives everyone else. She says, I either need to kill you right now, or I'll allow you to stay alive if you disappear, take a whole new name and identity, never come back here again, but also feed me some more information about this quote-unquote rebel movement. And of course he decides that he's gonna feed her some information because he actually does know a little bit about a rebel movement. He doesn't know if it's the rebel movement that the king's worried about, but he knows about one, and he says that he'll give her information on that if she lets him live. So when she asks him, okay, like what's your rebel movement about? He says that there is a group of people who want to put Aelin Galathynius back on the throne. And if you're confused, that makes sense because we haven't heard this name before. Aelin Galathynius is the rightful heir to Terrasen. Only problem is she died when Adarlan conquered the Terrasen kingdom. Obviously, Celaena, who's from Terrasen, she knows the story. She knows that Aelin is dead. So she's like, what do you mean they want to put her on the throne? Like, that's not possible because she's dead and she's been dead for almost 10 years now. But Archer shares that he's been hearing a lot of whispers and there's some people who are saying that Aelin Galathynius is alive and well. And not only that, but she's raising an army, building a court, and she plans on overtaking Adarlan. Then Archer shares that a lot of the people who are a part of this Aelin Galathynius movement are actually going to be at a party tomorrow night. So there's like this masquerade party that he was invited to, and a lot of the people that he believes are a part of this movement are going to be at this party. So he says, why don't you come as my date and you can kind of scope things out. So she agrees. She's going to come with him to this party, but she warns him that if he tries anything or messes around with her and tries to give her fake information, she is going to him and rescind her offer to save his life. So we get back to the castle and Celaena shares everything with Chaol. Maybe not everything, obviously she doesn't share that she's allowing him to live, but she does share that she's basically manipulating some information out of him about this rebel movement. And then she also tells him about the party that she's going to. Something interesting here, and I feel like this is where we definitely start to see a shift in how Chaol views the world. He agrees with her that they shouldn't tell the king yet. Now mind you, Chaol's always been like whatever the king once goes, but now he seems like he's leaning more towards Celaena on some of these things. So she thinks they shouldn't tell the king anything until they get more information, and he just agrees. Chapter 12. We are at the masquerade party with Celaena and Archer Finn. So they're walking around and Archer Finn's giving her the lowdown of all the attendees there and basically reveals that the guy who's throwing this party and whose house the party is at is Davis. And he believes that Davis is actually one of the leaders of this rebel movement. She decides, I need to get into this guy's office. And Archer's like, absolutely, let me help you. So he takes her up to her office and using like a bobby pin or whatever, breaks into it because it's locked, obviously. And Celaena goes in and Archer's like, they're gonna notice if we're both gone, so I need to head back downstairs. Let me know if you find anything. So he heads downstairs and Celaena's looking around. She literally turns everything over. She cannot find anything. So she starts to leave, basically thinking that this is a dead end. And then she sees something out of the corner of her eye. There is a book on a bookshelf, and with gold engraving on the side, there are word marks. Obviously, that's a very big deal. We learned in book 1. So she pulls that off the shelf and she's flipping through it. it and she can't really understand anything in there, but there's something written in the back in the common tongue. It is only with the eye that one can see rightly. We have no idea what this means, but Celaena hears footsteps, so she doesn't really have time to figure it out. She slams the book shut and puts it back. So she hears these footsteps and she decides to jump out the window, but her dress is too big that she can't get out the window. So she has to really call on her acting skills and she starts like fake sobbing. So Davis walks into the office and she is like, oh, my betrothed broke up with me, and she's all sobbing and he's like, please get out of my office. But then he asked her, how did you get in here? And she was like, oh, one of your maids just let me in so that I could have a moment alone. He's like, there's a bathroom downstairs, like get out of my office. And as she's going to walk out, he grabs her and he's like, no one else has the keys to my office except for me. And then he pulls a dagger out, and before she even has time to react, he slices up her arm. And thankfully, because she's an assassin and she's quick, she's able to grab it and like in the side of his neck. So he's no longer with us, but very quickly she starts to not feel well and she smells something very familiar. It is Gloriella. Apparently Gloriella is what she was poisoned with the night that she was taken to Endovir, so it's very much ingrained in her brain. So she knows that Gloriella is now like in her bloodstream and it's highly poisonous. Apparently it like paralyzes you and knocks you out. So she knows that she has minutes not only to get out of here but to get back to the castle. So she literally, with the knife, she cuts off the skirts of her dress, jumps out the window, and is literally like sprinting to the castle. I guess this house is pretty close to the castle because she gets almost to the front gates, realizes that she could get in a lot of trouble if she's caught. She's supposed to be the king's assassin and no one's supposed to know that she's responsible for any of the murders. Like they're not supposed to be able to be traced back to her. So she can't actually go through the front gate and have people see her. So she realizes that the barracks are right off to the side of the front gate. So she runs in there, and I guess Chaol's rooms are like right off the barracks. You learn a lot about the layout of the castle in this scene, I guess. She runs into Chaol's rooms and she basically just goes, Gloriella! And then she's knocked out. Chapter 13, Chaol's point of view. Celaena just burst into his rooms, shouted Gloriella, dropped to the ground. She's wearing a nice dress that's covered in blood and like half the skirts are missing, and she's just there, and he's losing his mind because he really cares about her and she's paralyzed and he thinks she's probably dead. So he calls for a healer, runs to her rooms and basically tells them like, got any antidotes for Gloriella? Thankfully they do, and they're able to administer it, but they didn't know how much Gloriella she got in her system, so they gave her like a crazy ton of antidotes and she ends up like basically ODing and having to like throw it all up. It's like this whole thing. But we jump to Celaena's point of view the next morning where she's waking up and Chaol's sleeping on the chair next to her, and basically he wakes up and tells her like everything that went down. Then she tells him everything that went down. They decide, you know what, the king doesn't need to know about this because she could easily get fired and sent back to Endovir if he finds out how sloppy this job went. But then something really cute happens. Celaena realizes in her poison-addled mind state, the only person she could think about getting to was Chaol because she knew she felt safe with Chaol. And she's realizing she might like Chaol more than she allowed herself to originally think. Chapter 14. Celaena's going back to the library for the first time since seeing that like creepy animalistic hooded creature thing, and homegirl is armed to the teeth. Like she's got every weapon on her that she could possibly have. She decides to explore the library a little bit and maybe find some answers. We get a little bit more information about the library because we didn't really hear much. I mean, I guess we could have assumed the library was big because they talked about millions of books or whatever. Not only is it big enough to be its own castle, but it's also 3 stories high. So imagine like crazy huge, and then on top of that times 3. Apparently in book 1, Dorian mentioned something about there being a secret library below the floor, so like a 4th secret level of the library. Celaena's wondering if that's real. So she starts exploring around the library and she's going back to such far corners that it is like dusty, it is neglected, like clearly no one's been back to these corners of the library in a very long time. So she starts walking along the wall and she runs into a tapestry. And if this girl's learned anything about living in this castle, it's that you always want to check behind the tapestries. So she does, and sure enough, there's a secret passageway. So she decides to go in, of course, and start to explore. It's pitch black in there, there, but I guess there's like oil and a way to light a torch down there or something. I don't know. That part of the book always really confused me, but somehow she finds light. She's going through, and this place is clearly abandoned, like no one's been down here for the longest of times. And she's noticing that there's a lot of carvings on the wall. And as she keeps going down the hallway, and by the way, she describes like some of the faces of the carvings feel like they're watching her. And if that isn't terrifying, I don't know what is. She does, as she gets further in, she realizes that a lot of the creatures carved into the walls are actually fae. Then on top of that, she realizes she can strongly smell iron. So she follows the smell and she comes across a door, and this door is 100% iron through and through. She knows that she has not seen any other doors like this door in the castle. And then on top of that, we learn that iron is the only element entirely immune to magic. So that causes us to question, is this door meant to keep something out or to keep something in? So she starts peeking around the door and she gets on the floor to look under the tiny crack at the bottom of the door, and she sees eyes looking back at her. The stress I get every single time reading that part, the way she did not scream her head off, I would have just thrown up right there. Like, no thank you. She books it out of there, as she should. Then we're actually gonna jump to Dorian's POV, because although his night isn't as crazy as Celaena's, it's still pretty whack because he's having nightmares. I forget what the nightmare's about. I don't think it's relevant, but he basically shoots awake and he realizes his room is freezing, like to the point where he can see his breath. He's like, oh, that's weird. So he gets out of bed to, like, I guess close a window or find out why the room's freezing. And then he turns around exactly in an outline where his body was. The bed is covered in frost, as if the cold temperature is coming from him. Chapter 15. Celaena later that night is at the dinner that's supposed to be like celebrating Holland's return, and she usually doesn't come to these dinners unless she's like required to for work purposes, but apparently Rena Goldsmith is going to be performing, and she's, I guess, a really popular musician that Celaena really likes. And she's supposed to be like the guest performance at this fancy dinner. And this next part is honestly such like a small detail, but honestly, it's the details that matter when it comes to romance in these books. Celaena is sitting at a table with Chaol and all of Chaol's men, and they're obviously very tense around her because they all know who she is now, and she kind of freaks them all out. And Chaol can tell, and he knows that it bothers Celaena that everyone's so afraid of her and is afraid to like treat her like a human being. So he starts like teasing her in front of these guys in order to show them like how personable she is. And so they start bantering and the guys think it's funny. And so then they start talking to her and treating her more like just like one of the guys. And I think that's really sweet and intentional on Chaol's end, because I feel like up until this point in the book, we see him being so self-centered. So to see him stepping out of himself and thinking about Celaena is nice to see. It's the bare minimum, but it's nice to see. It's showing growth. So Rena goes up to sing, and her voice is ethereal, and she's singing along with a harp and a violin, which if you ask me, that is a beautiful combination. And she sings a bunch of songs, and they're all beautiful, and everyone's very entranced by it. But she gets to the last song of the night. She starts singing a song about a fae girl and how all of these non-magical kings all sought her power for themselves. The ending something along the lines of a knight with no power who just loved her because he was a loving person, ended up being with her, and none of the kings got her magical powers. That part's not so relevant, but what is relevant is that this is very clearly a slap in the face to the royal family who has banned magic, and the song is basically saying you ban magic because you can't have it and you can't stand that there's people out there more powerful than you. Now tell me that is not a real gutsy thing to sing in front of the king. Apparently this song is a very well-known song in Terrasen, and it reminds Celaena of her childhood, and so she starts to get really emotional and she's trying not to cry because, like I said, this song being sung is crazy offensive to the royal family. Honestly, the fact that they let her sing it all the way through to me is kind of crazy, but Celaena's like really moved and emotional by this, but she can't cry because she can't show that sort of emotion in front of the royal family. It would be extremely offensive and she could get in trouble. And Chaol, like under the table, holds her hand and tries to like soothe and comfort her. This, I think, is the moment where I start to understand the Chaol and Celaena pairing. I honestly, up until this point, never saw it, but it's in this moment that I actually see it. So then we're gonna jump to Dorian's point of view because he's witnessing all of this this happen. And it's really heartbreaking at first. Then it actually does, I feel like, give you a lot of relief, especially if you loved Celaena and Dorian in the first book, because he has this moment where he says, Celaena deserves a knight in shining armor, which is exactly what Chaol is, and I deserve someone who's gonna love me as much as I love them, which is a very good standard if you ask me. It literally says that Dorian closed his eyes in that moment he decided to let her go. About time. So no more love triangle. There's definitely still gonna be like feelings here and there, like Dorian can't just stop having feelings or feeling maybe a little bit betrayed by everything, but like he definitely isn't like pining for Celaena anymore. So that's a nice kind of like character growth moment for Dorian. So then we're gonna jump to the king's point of view. After the last song, he takes Rena Goldsmith and the violinist and the harpist down to the dungeons, and he beheads both the violinist and the harpist. And right before Rena's beheaded, she looks the king right in the eyes and she says, "You killed everyone that I loved for having magic. So I worked my entire life to become the best musician I could be so that I could be invited to sing in your court and to sing this song to you. Basically so that you can see how everyone else sees you." And then she's murdered. Chapter 16, Celaena and Nehemia are in Celaena's room. And Nehemia just starts scolding Celaena. She's like, "Look, I don't know how much longer I can put up with the fact that you were murdering for a corrupt man. There is no honor in that. I don't know how I can keep being friends with such a person who's not honorable." I'm really conflicted on this part personally. I try not to put too much of my personal opinion in these plot summaries, but this is something where, what do you want her to do? Go back to slave camp? I don't think it's wrong for her to say something, but I do think she's very judgmental and she comes on Celaena really strong for choosing survival. Besides the point. Celaena actually takes this time to tell Nehemia the truth, that she actually hasn't killed any of the people that she's been assigned to kill. She's been giving them an option out, and all of them have taken the option out. So technically, she hasn't killed a single person. And she actually shares how Archer Finn is feeding her information about this rebel movement, about getting Aelin Galathinius back up on the throne. Something weird here is that Nehemia then starts judging Archer Finn. Like, how unhonorable of him to just share all that information with you. Like, I get that people shouldn't be quick to betray other people, but he's not a part of this movement. He just has heard whispers about it. He doesn't even know if this movement's real. Celaena and Nehemia decide to go down to Elena's tomb to get more answers, because Celaena did tell Nehemia about the riddle she found in the back of the wordmark book, basically saying only with the eye can one see rightly or something like that. So they're looking around to see what they can discover. Celaena notices something for the first time. Obviously we've known that there's like a lot of carvings and engravings on the wall all around the tomb, but they start to notice that there's a bunch of constellations like sprinkled all over the walls. There's one constellation of a stag. Now this is special because a stag is actually very symbolic of Terrasen, and this stag is very clearly like looking at something, and so they kind of trace where his eyes are going, and there is an engraving of an eye on the wall, and where the iris of the eye would be, it's completely hollow, like it's just a hole in the wall. So Celaena goes up to like look into it, and sure enough there's like a wall on the other side, like she can't actually see anything. So they turn to Moore and they're like, "Sassy door knocker, like what's going on over here? Like, do you have any answers for us?" And he was like, "Ask me the right questions and I'll give you the right answers." And they're like, "Well, that's not very helpful." And he's like, "Well, that's not my problem." So I don't know. I don't know why Moore's here. Like, I truly think Moore is just here for comedic entertainment, because I don't think he really provides any value to the plot, and he's definitely not helpful. This is where Celaena asks for probably like the third or fourth time, I feel like, in this entire series, like, "Hey, will you please teach me word marks?" And Nehemia actually finally agrees. They end up going back to the rooms, and luckily just in time, because Philippa walks through that door like moments after they get back upstairs, and she has a letter for Celaena from Archer Finn, and it's a list of names. And by names I mean names of people who he believes to be a part of this rebel movement. Celaena says, "See ya, Nehemia," and then she just decides to prance from rooftop to rooftop, stalking all the people on this list to see if anyone does anything sketchy. But she was asked to do some more guard duty at tonight's dinner, so she does have to like head back for that. Chapter 17. Celaena is serving as a guard at this ballroom dinner festivity. I don't know. There's honestly so many festivities celebrating Holland being back that you kind of lose track. It's like there were 3 dinners, and then there's gonna be 2 balls, and then there's gonna be this huge birthday celebration in a couple chapters. It's this whole thing. But apparently there's like a ball going on right now, and she's supposed to stand guard. And then of course there's Dorian, who is still being absolutely attacked by all the single ladies in the court who are desperate to become his queen. Of course, he cannot get away from the dance floor because he has to dance with each one of them, and there are a lot of them. So Chaol is looking around. Obviously, he's in charge of all the guards, so he's just keeping track to make sure everyone's there. But then when he gets to Celaena's spot, he realizes Celaena is no longer in the ballroom. Warning flags. I need to find my assassin. So he starts walking around to find her, and he turns the corner to see her dancing by herself to the music out in like the freezing cold. Celaena realizes that he's been watching her, and she gets super mad, so she's just like jumping to be really argumentative, but then he just swoops in and dances with her, and so they're just dancing together, and it's really cute. This part that absolutely kills me is in the book. It says, and Celaena looked at him and she realized she was home. She has not had a home since she was 8 years old, and she feels at home with Chaol. And I think that's very beautifully written on Sarah J Maas's part, because she's like built up for the past 2 books how big of a deal it is to Celaena to not have a home, but Chaol's her home. So we're gonna jump to Dorian's POV. He finally gets a break from all the desperate single ladies, and he decides he's gonna walk outside for a breath of fresh air. Do you remember what's going on outside? He starts to go outside and he sees that Chaol and Celaena are dancing together, and he just stands there and he just dies inside a little bit. And as he is standing there staring at them, heartbroken, Nehemia does walk up. She decides she's gonna start talking court politics with him, because apparently Roland, who has been like assigned to micromanage her, he's apparently fighting for Calculla. If you remember, that is the prison camp that's full of Elway people. He wants to expand it and make it bigger and pack it with even more Elway people. And she's basically telling Dorian, you need to stop this. And he was like, I can't stop this. She's like, do you mean can't or won't? And that's where Dorian's like, look, you don't understand. I don't have that kind of power. But then Nehemia's response to that is actually insane. Nehemia stared at him for a long moment before nodding. You have power in you, Prince. More power than you realize. She touched his chest, tracing a symbol there too. It sleeps, she whispered, tapping his heart. In here. When the time comes, when it awakens, do not be afraid. She removed her hand and gave him a sad smile. When it is time, I will help you. And with that, she walked away. He stared after the princess, wondering what her last words meant, and why, when she said them, something ancient and slumbering deep inside of him had opened an eye. Chapter 18. Celaena is just sitting in Archer Finn's townhouse waiting for him to get home, which gives her time to think about how dancing with Chaol last night felt, and also how much of a disaster her first word mark lesson with Nehemia was this morning, because apparently that happened and it's not going well. So Archer Finn gets home and Celaena just decides to get straight to business. Archer has 3 weeks before he gets fake murdered, and she needs way more information than he's been giving her, because names is not enough at this point. She needs actual hard proof that these people are a part of a movement, and then she needs proof of what the movement is. And Archer has 6 days to get Celaena more information before she removes the deal and just unalives him. Now we're gonna jump to Dorian's point of view. There is a council meeting and they're talking about the expansion of Calculla. And while they're talking about it, Dorian notices a really small detail. Do you remember how we talked about in book 1 how both Duke Parrington and the King of Aderlin had these weird black stone rings? Apparently Roland is wearing one now. So the 3 of them are clearly a part of some like cult or club that no one else really knows what's going on there. But anyways, Roland is basically saying like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. Like, we're gonna expand Calculla and blah, 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 blah. Dorian speaks up. And he says what y'all are doing is wrong. It's inhuman. And then when the people were trying to say like, oh, we're just providing a place for them to stay, like we're really doing them a favor. And then he says, I dare you to spend 1 night in Calculla and tell me that's how you feel. His dad, the king, just like blows up at him. So Dorian just storms out of there. Like, he is fuming. He is so mad that he gets to his rooms and he punches the wall. Mind you, it's a stone wall. That's not very smart of him, if you ask me. Because I don't know about you, but if you ever punched a rock at full force, The rock's winning. Look at this. The rock cracks and a window a couple feet over to his right shatters. He looks at his hand. It is totally fine. No cuts, no bruises, no broken bones, nothing. And then he looks at the floor around him and there's shattered glass everywhere except for a tiny circle around him. He was protected from the glass. That is a lot to unpack in and of itself, but we're actually gonna jump to Celaena and Chaol's point of view for right now. They're just like talking or whatever in Chaol's rooms as they usually do in the evenings, and she's like, you know what? I don't get enough sweets and I want chocolate cake. I think I deserve some chocolate cake. So he's like, fine, I'll get you some chocolate cake. And he does. They eat chocolate cake late into the night, talking, having a grand old time. And then I guess Chaol falls asleep while they're talking because they talk super late. Celaena starts to walk back to her room and Dorian is standing in front of her door. And she's like, are you okay? Like, he clearly doesn't seem all right. And he said that he was looking for Nehemia and he couldn't find her. And he assumed that if she wasn't in her room, she'd be in Celaena's, but she's not. And Celaena's like, dude, can I help you? Like, you don't seem okay. And he's like, no, I'm fine. And just like disappears and leaves as fast as possible. Chapter 19, we are in Chaol's point of view because he is working on plans for security for the carnival that they're putting on in Holland's birthday celebration. So the king pulls Chaol aside not only to talk about the security plans, but also to tell him that there's been some whisperings about a plan to hurt the Princess Nehemia. And Chaol's like, oh, absolutely. Like, I'll put extra guards on her. I'll make sure nothing happens. He's like, her and Celaena are pretty close. I can have Celaena be one of her guards. And the king's like, absolutely not. Put as many guards on Nehemia as you want, but do not tell Celaena. I don't want her knowing about this. Like, let's keep it secret from her for now. We don't really know why. And this is definitely where things take an interesting twist. And Chaol's kind of in this weird point where he's like, well, should I tell Celaena? Or like, the king's asking me not to, and I work for the king, but it's Celaena's best friend. Shouldn't she know if her friend's being threatened? Like, she would want to know that. But Chaol decides to listen to the king. He's like, you know what? Like, this is my boss. I gotta listen to him. Let's take a break from that and jump to Dorian's point of view, because he is crazy stressed and he's just trying to like spar stress away, I guess. That's like what he does when he's not in the kennels, is he spars. And Roland walks in to the barracks and offers to spar with him. Obviously, Dorian does not want to hang out with Roland. He does not like Roland, especially after what happened yesterday in the council meeting. But Roland actually tells him like, hey dude, like after what you said, I totally agreed with you. So I actually called off the vote and we didn't vote on it yesterday. I'm delaying this as much as possible. I think you're right. None of us, if we stayed there for a night, would actually claim half the stuff we're saying. Dorian's like, oh, has Roland changed maybe? And they end up doing some bonding. Like, they hang out for a good bit. They're bonding a little bit. Dorian's still wary that he's not like the best person. He is accepting the fact that maybe Roland has changed and he's not just some like bratty little kid anymore. So after they spar for a bit, he decides to go check out the area where they're setting up for the carnival. And then he runs into Chaol and Celaena, who I guess had the same idea. And they decide to just look around and walk around together. Dorian obviously feels closest to these two, so naturally he wants to tell them what's going on. But at the same time, a lot of signs are pointing to the fact that magic is involved. This is where it gets really dangerous. Having magic is punishable by death in this kingdom. And even though they're the people he's closest to, he as a prince has been trained his entire life not to trust anyone with anything that could affect your ability to have the crown. So they're just walking around when they come across one of the tents of sorts, and it is a fortune teller. And she has sharp iron teeth. She is an iron teeth witch. This is the first witch that we meet. Like, we've talked about them in the past, but they have not been a part of the story yet. So this is Baba Yellowlegs. Baba Yellowlegs is an iron teeth witch, which quite literally means that she's a witch and she has iron teeth. And Dorian notices off the bat, not only does she kind of freak him out, but Celaena is terrified. Like, she looks like she's gonna throw up and bolt. Like, he has never seen her this terrified, except for maybe the first time she met his father. So they're like, you know what, let's head back to the castle. So they start to leave, and Dorian's like, oh hey guys, actually let's go to the stables first. I want to show you guys something. And they're like, okay, why not? So they start walking to the stables, and there is an Asterian horse, which is basically the most expensive horse you can get. They basically say it's a horse fit for a prince. Like, it's the nicest, most pure breed. I don't know know a lot about horses, but it's a really nice horse. And Dorian reveals that it is his birthday gift to Chaol, whose birthday is coming up soon. And then, because I guess she had to make this moment about herself, even though it was a really special moment between Dorian and Chaol, Celaena's like, I had an Asterian mare once. And they look at her and they go, how did you have an Asterian mare? She's like, oh, I stole one from a lord. Okay, still crazy, like Celaena truth bomb moment for sure, but this isn't about you, so can you just like stand off to the side and let Chaol and Dorian have their moment? So Celaena says, good night, y'all have your moment, and she leaves. And she decides to go immediately and straight to the tomb of Elena because something occurred to her, I guess, in that moment in the stables. The necklace that she has, the Eye of Elena, is the perfect size to fit in the hollowed out eye engraved in the wall in Elena's tomb. Chapter 20. Celaena wakes up more and she's like, look, does this amulet, the Eye of Elena, does it have any magic powers? And he's like, absolutely, it can protect you. But that's pretty much all it does. So she goes up to the eye in the wall and she puts the amulet in there and nothing at all happens. She even tries like taking it out, putting it in backwards, upside down, forwards, on its side, whatever. Like she tries multiple ways and nothing's working. She even tries like saying the riddle in a couple things, or even things that she's heard Elena say a couple times and like tries to quote her and like call upon magic or whatever, and Mort's basically laughing and making fun of her. So she's like, you know what, I'm done for the night. So she goes back to her rooms and calls it a night. That night, Celaena has nightmares. She has a nightmare that she's standing in front of the frozen river that she almost died in when she was 8 years old, when Adarlan came and conquered her kingdom. And she's looking at this river and she looks up and she sees a stag on the other side of the river, which was the symbol of her home, Terrasen. And I think the stag being unattainable is representing her, like not being able to be home, like it's far away from her and like death is in between her and her home. That's how I interpret it. But then again, that might also just be me looking into stuff way too deeply. And then she wakes up and she leaves the castle. She's like, I need to get away today. And we find out why very quickly. But we're gonna find out in Chaol's point of view. He decides to come by Celaena's room, and he actually finds Nehemia there instead. And Nehemia says he is not gonna find her, and she's taken the day off, and he needs to leave her alone. And he's like, what do you mean? She can't just take the day off. Like, unless the king gives her a day off, she can't just leave. And then Nehemia informs him that it is the 10-year anniversary of Adarlan taking out Terrasen and her parents being murdered, and her almost dying and losing her home forever. If that doesn't get you a day off, I don't know what does. Honestly, I think it's gonna take 3 parts to get through all of Crown of Midnight, so I'm just gonna stop it right here as part 1. And fun fact, I hate making you guys wait a whole week for the next episode, so I'm actually gonna be releasing part 2 on Friday. So subscribe to get notified for when that comes out, but in the meantime, watch some of my other Sarah J. Maas related videos, and I will see you on Friday with part 2.